In the spring of 2009, a 33-year-old geologist named Emily Carver entered the Grand Canyon for what was supposed to be a simple 3-day mapping trip. She worked for a university research team studying erosion patterns along the Hance Rapids corridor. The assignment was routine: collect 14 sediment samples, record their coordinates, and return by Sunday evening. Emily followed procedure precisely, just as she always did. When she didn't check in that night, no one was immediately alarmed. Communication delays were common. But by Monday morning, her supervisor noticed something odd: no uploaded data, no message, and a satellite tracker that had stopped transmitting the previous evening. Park rangers were sent to verify her location. Her Subaru was still parked neatly at the trailhead, permit displayed on the dash, and a folded checklist sat on the passenger seat. Every line was ticked off except the final one: return call. 2 days later, an aerial search spotted her orange tent near Hance Creek. It was upright, zipped, and undisturbed. Inside were her sleeping bag, stove, GPS, and notebook. Nothing suggested distress or flight. The last line in that notebook stopped mid-sentence. Layer 7 exposure contains. The pen had dragged across the page, leaving the thought unfinished. Investigators cataloged her equipment. 13 sample bags were found, all numbered and sealed. One, labeled Najar 14, was missing. A 9-day search followed. Rangers, volunteers, dogs, and helicopters covered nearly 40 square miles. They found no footprints beyond the campsite, no signs of a fall, no trace of Emily Carver. Her case joined the long list of unexplained vanishings inside the canyon, quietly filed away, never solved. 15 years later, a backpacker hiking the same route uncovered a torn strap, a rusted field hammer, and a small data card buried under the sand. Etched on its surface were 2 initials: EC. What was on that card would change everything investigators thought they knew about her final hours. She went into the canyon to study its history and became part of it. By every account, Emily Carver was the kind of person who believed that careful planning could prevent chaos. Her friends used to joke that she packed for a 3-day trip like she was preparing for a lunar landing. It wasn't arrogance, it was habit, a quiet discipline that made her reliable in a field where nature rarely cooperates. Emily was a geologist for the University of Colorado. Her work focused on river sediment layers, studying how time leaves its fingerprints on stone. The Grand Canyon was her latest assignment, and as she told her colleagues, her favorite place on Earth to work. Her supervisor, Dr. Marianne Boyd, approved a simple plan: 3 days in the canyon, following the Tanner Trail down to Hance Rapids, collecting erosion samples from a known layer called Exposure 7. Emily spent the week before the trip building her kit. On her kitchen counter sat 14 small sample bags, each labeled by hand, EC Layer 1 through 14. She numbered her field notebooks, backed up her GPS data, and printed 2 copies of every map. When her roommate asked why, she smiled and said, "Because if one plan fails, I still have 2 more." On the night before she left, she recorded a brief voice note, a habit she used for self-checks in the field. Friday, May 8th, weather clear, expected temperature low 90s, route Tanner Trail to Hance Creek, samples layers 1 through 7, back Sunday, layer 7 exposures priority. Her tone was calm, methodical, almost routine, the kind of voice used to documenting, not storytelling. That same note would later become part of her case file. At dawn, Emily packed her 60-liter Osprey backpack with the same precision she brought to everything: camera, GPS, satellite tracker, notebook, spare batteries, all neatly arranged. She folded her maps twice, then slid them into a waterproof sleeve. Every tool had its place. Nothing was rushed. At 6 a.m., she sent one final email to Dr. Boyd. Leaving now. No expected issues. Back Sunday night. Then she locked her apartment, set her voicemail to fieldwork, limited signal, and drove toward the South Rim. On the way, she stopped at a small cafe just outside the park. The cashier later remembered her, quiet, polite, ordering black coffee and a muffin, paying in cash. She sat by the window for a few minutes, reviewing her notes before heading out again. There was nothing unusual in her behavior that morning. No sign of hesitation, no stress, no rush. Emily Carver was doing what she had done dozens of times before, heading into the field to collect data, follow procedure, and come back home. Her last recorded words before the trip began were the same ones printed at the top of her research log. Back Sunday, Layer 7 exposures priority. The morning of May 8th, 2009, began without a flaw. The forecast promised clear skies, light winds, and temperatures that hovered comfortably in the mid-80s. It was, by all accounts, perfect hiking weather, the kind of day that invited people down into the canyon rather than warning them away. At 7:42 a.m., Emily Carver signed her name into the backcountry register at the Tanner Trailhead. Her handwriting was neat and even, the same as always. Beside her name, she wrote her route: Tanner Trail, Hants Creek, return Sunday, and then, in smaller print, the initials EC, a quiet habit of hers, like a scientist signing her work. The first part of the descent was steady and uneventful. The Tanner Trail was long, open, and sun-baked, wind us down through switchbacks that revealed new colors with every turn: ochre, amber, and layers of white limestone. Emily stopped twice to photograph the formations. Her GPS data later showed precise pauses at mile 2 and mile 4, each lasting under 5 minutes. Around 10:15 a.m., two hikers coming up the trail crossed paths with her. They were an older couple from Nevada, heading back toward the rim after camping near the river. She looked focused, the husband later told investigators, just nodded, smiled, and kept walking. She had that look of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. The wife remembered her too. A calm voice, steady steps, nothing hurried. She didn't look lost. She looked comfortable. By midday, the heat grew sharper. The canyon walls amplified it, turning the trail into a furnace of reflected light. Emily slowed her pace but continued without issue. Her tracker pinged every 2 hours, clean, steady, and consistent. At 3:11 p.m., the GPS recorded her final log at the lower switchback. Reached river route, conditions stable. It was exactly where she planned to be. At 5:47 p.m., her digital recorder captured a short voice note. The sounds of running water and wind can be heard faintly in the background before Emily speaks, her tone calm and even. Camp near the river, perfect light, will continue tomorrow. She sounded tired but content, like someone closing out a productive day. There were no signs of distress in her voice, no noise that suggested she wasn't alone. That file would become the last confirmed evidence of her presence. At 6:42 p.m., the satellite tracker transmitted its final signal, roughly 400 meters from the campsite she described. Then it went silent. The device never sent another ping. By all available data, Emily Carver had made it safely to her destination. She had food, water, light, and a clear trail back to the rim. And yet, from that moment on, there would be no more recordings, no more signals, and no trace of where she went after the canyon swallowed her last transmission. Monday morning came quietly. But for the research team at the university, something felt off. By 9 a.m., Emily Carver's daily field update hadn't arrived. No email, no message, no satellite ping. She was punctual by habit. Even from remote field sites, she found ways to check in. Her supervisor, Dr. Marianne Boyd, waited another few hours before concern hardened into protocol. She opened Emily's route file, hoping to see new data logs, but the spreadsheet that usually filled with coordinates and timestamps was blank after Saturday evening. At 12:30 p.m., Dr. Boyd called Grand Canyon National Park Dispatch. Her tone was calm but firm. "We have a solo permit holder who's late. She was due out yesterday." By mid-afternoon, Ranger Luke Parson was assigned to a welfare check. He drove out to the Tanner Trail parking area. Dusty gravel, 3 vehicles in total. Emily's silver Subaru sat near the edge, clean, untouched, a thin film of sand on the windshield. The driver's door was locked, but her permit was visible under the wiper. Through the glass, he saw her usual organization: a folded jacket on the passenger seat, 2 water bottles in the cup holder, and a clipboard on the dash. The clipboard held her handwritten checklist titled Field Prep. Every line bore a small tick mark: maps, batteries, equipment, food, except the last, return call. Parson photographed the interior, noted the odometer reading, and reported back. There was no sign of tampering, no indication she had returned. Standard procedure required a waiting period before escalation. The first evening passed with no new signal from her GPS beacon. By dawn on Tuesday, the file officially changed status from overdue to missing. 2 rangers started down the trail at sunrise, following the route printed on her permit. Early on, they found what they expected: boot impressions in the dust, steady spacing, consistent direction. The prints matched her shoe size and tread pattern from a previous expedition. But past the lower switchback, the marks faded into slick rock and disappeared. By noon, temperatures in the canyon pushed into the 90s. The search widened. A helicopter joined the effort, scanning the bends of Hance Creek for any bright color that might stand out against the stone. At 2:40 p.m., the pilot radioed the first sighting. "Visual on orange, possible shelter near creek bed, sending coordinates." From the air, it looked almost staged, a single orange tent pitched neatly beside a thin ribbon of water. The rainfly was clipped, the stakes were secure, and the zipper line ran straight down the center. No collapsed poles, no scattered gear. They circled twice. No movement, no footprints visible in the sand surrounding it. Only the smooth, undisturbed surface of a camp that looked as if someone had just stepped away for a moment. The crew marked the location and returned to base before sunset. Ground teams would reach the site the next morning, for now all they had was an image taken from a helicopter window. Emily's tent, zipped, silent, and perfectly intact. A picture that, for investigators, raised more questions than it answered. When investigators finally reached the canyon floor the next morning, the air was already heating fast. The sun rose sharp and white through the haze, burning off the early chill as they moved along the dry switchbacks toward the coordinates called in from the helicopter. It took nearly 4 hours to descend. The trail narrowed into stretches of loose rock and hard-packed sand before opening into a flat section near Hance Creek, where the sound of running water broke the silence. The tent came into view just as the light shifted over the cliffs, bright orange against gray stone, perfectly upright, untouched. Ranger Luke Parson led the approach, careful not to disturb the ground around the site. From a distance, nothing looked wrong. No collapsed poles, no torn fabric, No sign of a struggle, but the closer they came, the stranger the scene felt. Emily's campsite was arranged with almost mathematical precision. Her sleeping bag was rolled and strapped tight, resting just inside the tent's flap. The stove sat beside it, clean and dry, a small fuel canister still sealed. Her cooking pot and utensils were stacked neatly in a mesh bag. Outside, her boots were placed side by side on a flat rock, socks folded inside. The ground surrounding them was smooth. No boot prints, no animal tracks, not even the faint drag line of something brushed by the wind. It was as though the sand had been set flat again, like a table reset after a meal. Parson crouched near the doorway. "Looks like she meant to come back," he said quietly. Inside, a small notebook lay open beside a lantern. The last entry ended mid-sentence, the pen line drawn diagonally across the page as if interrupted mid-thought. Layer 7 exposure contains. The ink had smeared slightly, still dark and recent, but there were no further words. Her GPS device was found on the ground near her pack. The screen was blank, battery fully drained. When tested later, it held a complete log up until 6:42 p.m., the final ping before silence. 13 sample bags were laid out in a plastic crate near the tent entrance, each tagged and numbered. The 14th, marked in Schroeder 14, was missing. Investigators searched the immediate area for any trace of it. They followed the creek edge, sifted through brush, even scanned beneath flat stones. Nothing turned up. Her camera rested on a tripod near the riverbank. The lens cap was on, power off. Last image dated 2 days before her disappearance. A wide shot of the canyon wall glowing red under evening light. By the time the team finished their initial survey, the temperature had climbed past 90. The canyon walls pulsed with reflected heat. Still, not a single insect buzzed near the site. The stillness felt heavy, unnatural. Everything Emily had brought was in order, except the missing sample, the unfinished sentence, and the silence that surrounded them. To the investigators, it didn't look like a camp that had been abandoned. It looked like one that had been paused mid-moment, waiting for its owner to return. When the evidence from Emily Carver's campsite reached the analysis lab in Flagstaff, every item was logged and photographed before inspection. Her recorder, a small digital device clipped to the inside of her pack, showed a single unsent file, time-stamped May 9th, 6:08 p.m. Technicians played it through a monitor in the quiet of the evidence room. At first, the sound was ordinary, the faint rush of water, the steady hum of wind through the canyon walls, the faint scrape of her boot on gravel. Then her voice. It was calm but edged with fatigue. Storms picking up, moving uphill before dark. There was a pause, then the rustle of fabric and the sound of her pack shifting. Another fragment followed. "No signal down here. I'll try again once I clear the bend." After that, only the low wash of wind and running water. The recording ended abruptly. The clip lasted 38 seconds. It sounded like a woman preparing for an ordinary move to higher ground. Routine, logical, not panicked. But when investigators compared her words to the weather data from that night, something didn't fit. The skies over Hance Creek had been clear. No reports of lightning, no rain cells on the radar, not even scattered cloud cover. Visibility that evening was measured at nearly 10 miles. There had been no storm. The discrepancy seemed minor at first, a possible misreading. Maybe she'd heard the wind rise through the canyon and assumed rain was coming. But as analysts studied the recording, they found more inconsistencies. The sound of the wind didn't match conditions at her location. Its pitch was higher, sharper. the kind produced by stronger gusts at higher altitudes. It was as if the microphone had captured air pressure from a place hundreds of feet above her known campsite. The ambient noise raised further questions. In the final seconds of the file, a faint tone was detected, rhythmic, metallic, something that pulsed at exact intervals. It wasn't mechanical interference and it wasn't natural. When slowed down, it resembled the echo of a distant chime repeating at 4-second intervals. Emily's GPS showed no movement after 6:42 p.m., but if the audio was recorded at 6:08 p.m. and she mentioned moving uphill before dark, then the device had to have remained active after she left camp. That would mean the recorder, and possibly Emily, were no longer near the river when it captured the sound. The timestamps didn't align. The environment didn't match. The last known moments didn't make sense. Investigators ran simulations, mapping every potential route she could have taken within that 34-minute window. None of them explained why her recorder stopped abruptly, or why it contained no trace of her footsteps after the second line of speech. For the first time since the case began, the facts didn't line up. That small contradiction, a storm that never happened, marked the first real break in the narrative and the first question no one could answer. It was the moment the investigation shifted from a disappearance to a mystery. The official search for Emily Carver began at dawn on May 10th. It started small: a handful of rangers, a helicopter crew, and 2 volunteers from a nearby research team. Within 48 hours, it grew into one of the most coordinated efforts the park had mounted that year. By the 3rd day, the operation stretched across nearly 40 square miles. Searchers hiked in rotating teams, following her intended route mile by mile. Drones were deployed from the rim, sweeping low over canyons where radio signals couldn't reach. A K-9 unit from Coconino County joined on day 4. The dogs caught a faint scent near the switchbacks, traces of sweat and sunscreen, but it vanished before reaching the river. Rangers marked the location and moved on. Helicopter crews flew daily loops along Hance Creek, circling until sunset. The pilots reported perfect visibility, clear air, and no sign of movement below. No bright colors, no gear, no figure among the rocks. By the 5th day, fatigue began to set in. The canyon silence worked against them. Every echo carried for miles. Every shout bounced back empty. The radio chatter grew shorter, clipped, procedural. On day 6, searchers located a small cairn near a ridge 2 miles north of her camp, a deliberate stack of stones roughly knee-high. Rangers photographed it, logged the coordinates, and kept moving. The formation was old, weathered. It could have been made by anyone. The next day brought nothing. No footprints, no dropped gear, no torn fabric. The thermal imaging team, flown in from Phoenix, scanned the canyon at night. Their equipment detected no heat signatures apart from animals. A few foxes, 1 mule deer, and scattered birds roosting along the ledges. Every pass came back clean. By day 8, the command post at the rim shifted tone. The language on the reports changed. Active search became continued observation. Rangers stopped using the phrase rescue operation and replaced it with recovery probability low. On day 9, they pulled the helicopters. On day 10, the dogs were sent home. The final report listed every resource exhausted, every lead checked twice. The file concluded with a single sterile phrase: case unresolved. Emily Carver's name was moved from the active board to the cold case shelf, just below a file dated 1996 and above another from 1981. Both hikers lost in the same sector of the canyon. When the rangers broke camp, they left her tent as it was. It had become evidence now, preserved exactly as they found it. That evening, as the last team hiked out, Ranger Luke Parson paused at the trailhead and looked back toward the canyon. He'd been the first to find her car, the first to see her camp, and now the last to leave. He later told a colleague something he never wrote in the report. "She didn't fall," he said quietly. "She didn't run. It's like she just stepped out of the frame." The official case file for Emily Carver was closed in late August of 2009. The paperwork was clean, the evidence boxed, the summaries concise. On paper, it was just another missing hiker in a dangerous landscape. Tragic, but not extraordinary. But in early November, the file crossed another desk. A graduate student named Aaron Klain, working as an assistant archivist for the park's geological records, was digitizing older evidence inventories. His job was simple: match physical samples with their catalog numbers and confirm they existed in storage. When he reached the Carver case, something didn't add up. 13 sample bags were logged as recovered, labeled 1 through 13. The report noted sample number 14 missing at scene. But in the corresponding spreadsheet from the original GPS device, there were 14 coordinates recorded. The 14th entry didn't appear on the official map. Its location, when entered manually, placed it roughly 2 miles east of Hance Creek, in a narrow drainage corridor with no marked trails. Aaron brought the discrepancy to his supervisor, assuming it was a mapping error. It wasn't. The park's internal database flagged the coordinate immediately, displaying a warning message: access restricted, Whisper Wash sector. He had never heard the name before. Old rangers, however, knew it well. Whisper Wash was a local term, used quietly among veteran staff. It referred to an isolated cut of land that branched off from the main canyon, steep and unstable, an area known for sudden rockfall and distorted compass readings. On public maps, it didn't exist. On internal charts, it was shaded gray and left unmarked. Unofficially, the park had stopped issuing permits there after 1997. The last recorded access had been a maintenance survey that ended early due to environmental anomalies, vague wording that no one could now explain. Aaron pulled older reports from the same archive. 2 names surfaced: Diane Harper, 1981, and Michael Ross, 1996. Both vanished while conducting geological work near the same unlisted coordinates. Both cases were ruled environmental accidents. Neither body was recovered. The discovery unsettled him. The similarities were too precise. Same kind of work, same location, same lack of resolution. He typed the data into his notes, printed a small report, and sent it up the chain. The response came back in one line: information acknowledged, no further action required. The folder was returned to archives, sealed and logged again. But the 14th coordinate, the one Emily had marked, the one labeled Layer 7 Exposure, never left Aaron's mind. In the canyon's files, it was just a redacted grid reference. In every other sense, it was a place that didn't officially exist, and yet that was where her final data point led. 15 years passed before anyone mentioned Emily Carver's name outside a form or archived case file. The world had moved on, but the canyon had not. In 2024, Liam Harker, a 29-year-old backpacker and amateur filmmaker from Oregon, began work on a personal documentary series about unsolved disappearances in America's wilderness. His small channel, mostly quiet, steady footage of trails and campsites, had recently gained traction for its calm, investigative tone. He wasn't a thrill seeker or ghost hunter. He preferred facts over speculation. His rule was simple: Find the truth that's been sitting in plain sight too long. The story of Emily Carver fit perfectly into that pattern. He first learned about her from a message board discussing lost hikers with clean camps. Her case stood out because of its precision. No panic, no chaos, everything in order. A disappearance without disorder. By midsummer, he had permits approved and a route planned. He would retrace Emily's exact path down Tanner Trail to Hance Creek, documenting each stage as part of a series called Vanished Trails. He packed light, camera gear, a small drone, 2 GPS units, and an emergency beacon. The trip was meant to last 5 days. On his first night, he recorded a short log. Weather's calm, clear. Hard to believe someone could just vanish out here. Tomorrow I'll reach her campsite. The second day brought the familiar rhythm of descent, switchbacks, heat, and wind that carried no sound but his own footsteps. He filmed everything: the angles of the cliffs, the patterns in the stone, the quiet that builds until it becomes weight. By the third day, he arrived at the coordinates of Emily's final camp. Nothing remained except a faint square of discolored sand where her tent had stood. He filmed the site, compared it to archived photographs, and left a marker for his footage timeline. But it was on the fourth day, heading east toward the direction of her missing coordinate, that Liam found what no one else had. It happened mid-morning near a dry wash layered with shale and pale sandstone. The wind had carved out thin ledges, exposing rock that looked recently disturbed. He noticed a strip of faded nylon jutting from the slope, too straight to be natural. When he dug carefully around it, a fragment of canvas came loose, the torn strap of a field pack. Beneath it lay a rusted geological hammer, its handle cracked but still bearing a faint label in black marker, E. Carver. A few inches deeper, his trowel struck metal. It wasn't large, just a thin, rectangular object coated in dust and grit. He brushed it clean. The shape was unmistakable, a data card, old, scuffed, but intact. Scratched into the casing with something sharp were 2 small letters, EA, EC. Liam sat back, silent, staring at it for a long time before speaking into his camera. I think I just found something no one else did. He sealed the card in a plastic case, marked the coordinates, and turned off the recorder. For the first time in years, the canyon had given something back. When Liam Harker returned from his trip, he handed the small metal data card directly to the park authorities in Flagstaff. He didn't try to access it himself. He knew enough to leave evidence alone. The device looked primitive, an early 2000s digital media card, the kind used in handheld cameras or voice recorders. The outer shell was scratched, dented, and partially warped from heat, but the internal memory still registered as active. Technicians transferred its contents onto a secure server and began the slow process of recovery. At first, the files appeared damaged. Several entries were corrupted, fragmented by time and exposure. But one folder remained intact, labeled Layer Savell Field, a direct match to Emily's project notes. Inside were 8 video clips, totaling just over 23 minutes. The first few were standard field footage. Emily's voice carried over the sound of boots on gravel and wind through the canyon. She spoke in that calm, analytical tone that colleagues later described as her field voice. Sample zone confirmed. Eastern wall stratification consistent with erosion layer 7, recording exposure angles. The camera turned slowly, showing the canyon's interior, sheer red walls streaked with pale mineral lines. The light shifted as she adjusted her position, occasionally pausing to document the time and coordinates. In one clip, she crouched near a rock face and tapped her hammer against the surface. Unstable composition here, she noted. Possible collapse zone ahead, moving cautiously. Her breathing was steady. She wasn't frightened. She sounded like someone entirely in control of her environment. Then, about 12 minutes into the recovered footage, the pattern changed. Emily's narration stopped mid-sentence. The camera tilted slightly, unfocused, before stabilizing again. For nearly 10 seconds, she didn't speak. Only wind and faint echoes filled the frame. Then her voice, quieter than before. "There's another camp here?" She moved the camera slowly across the canyon floor. Nothing appeared in the shot except stone and scattered brush. No tent, no gear, no human presence. Her voice dropped again, barely audible. Who would set up down here? Investigators replayed the footage dozens of times, enhancing the shadows and adjusting exposure. No second campsite appeared, no structure, no debris. Still, her tone was unmistakable, confused, cautious. In the background, a faint sound began to rise, something like fabric flapping against metal. It came irregularly, almost rhythmic. The technicians assumed it was wind resonance, a natural echo of the canyon. Then, without warning, the audio cut out for exactly 3 seconds. When it returned, the video quality had degraded. The light was dimmer, her breathing louder. The final 20 seconds of footage were almost entirely still. The lens focused on the rock wall ahead, framed too close to reveal context. Then, just before the file ended, she whispered a final line. "It's not on the map." A sharp burst of static followed, accompanied by what sounded like rushing water, steady, forceful, echoing in the distance. Then the screen went black. No more files were found. No explanation was recorded. The analyst documented the final seconds frame by frame, noting every flicker and sound spike. But nothing in those images showed another person or another camp, or any clue that could explain what she'd seen. It was simply the end of the recording, and the last time Emily Carver's voice was ever heard. The footage from Emily Carver's recovered data card reignited a case that had been dormant for 15 years. For the first time since 2009, investigators reopened the archives, comparing her files against other unexplained disappearances inside the Grand Canyon. Within weeks, a pattern began to surface. 2 names kept reappearing in the older reports. Diane Harper, a graduate researcher who vanished in 1981, and Michael Ross, a geologist contracted by the state in 1996. Both had disappeared while conducting erosion studies near the Hance Rapids corridor, the same sector where Emily was last seen. The similarities went beyond location. Each of them had registered nearly identical objectives: document sediment composition along layer 7 exposures. Each had filed identical pre-trip logs, 3-day research permits, solo travel, limited radio contact, and in every case, the final GPS ping stopped within 1 mile of the same unlisted coordinate. The official classification for both earlier cases was accidental. Harper was believed to have fallen during a storm. Ross was presumed lost in a flash flood, but neither event was supported by weather data. Both weeks had been clear, calm, and dry, conditions nearly identical to the night Emily vanished. As the files were compared side by side, the repetition became impossible to ignore. 3 geologists, 3 decades apart, all vanishing in the same unmarked corridor known to rangers as Whisper Wash. Investigators overlaid their recorded trails. The paths converged so precisely that even the start and end times lined up within an hour of each other. Each researcher having reached their respective Layer 7 site between 5 and 6 in the evening. The deeper analysts dug, the stranger the coincidences grew. Each person had logged roughly the same amount of gear weight. Each had carried a camera. Each had recorded their last entry in the same tone, calm, methodical, and unfinished. One line from Harper's recovered notes mirrored Emily's final words almost exactly. Layer 7 exposure contains. Ross's journal ended the same way, cut off mid-sentence. When presented with the compiled evidence, one retired ranger who'd worked both earlier cases shook his head. Everyone called them accidents, he said, but accidents don't copy themselves. Despite the growing pattern, the report that summarized these findings never reached public record. It was filed internally under a provisional study tag, Environmental Correlation Report Restricted. The park's communications office declined interviews. Funding for follow-up fieldwork was denied. Still, for those who had seen the data laid out together, the conclusion was clear. Whatever drew Emily Carver into the canyon had been there before her. Same area, same objective, same silence that followed. In the spring of 2025, as Emily Carver's case began circulating again through podcasts and online forums, a journalist working on a feature about national park vanishings received an anonymous email. The message was short. You're looking in the right place. Whisper Wash was never supposed to be on the maps. Call this number. The number led to Thomas Avery, a 72-year-old retired ranger who had worked at Grand Canyon National Park from 1978 until his quiet resignation in 2003. When contacted, he didn't deny sending the message. I've kept quiet long enough, he said, but if you're going to tell it straight. Avery had been part of a maintenance division responsible for surveying side canyons after flash floods. Whisper Wash was one of them. Back then, it wasn't redacted. It appeared as a faint drainage line branching off the main Hance corridor. Rangers patrolled it routinely until the early 90s, when equipment problems started to mount. It began small, Avery said, compasses spinning, GPS readings that didn't make sense, radios dropping signal 10 minutes after entering the wash. You'd come out, everything worked fine again. They ran checks on their gear, batteries, antennas, calibration. Nothing was wrong. The interference, Avery explained, was localized. It affected magnetic equipment and digital recorders, sometimes even camera shutters. The brass called it an anomaly, he said. We called it bad luck, but after the third search incident, it wasn't luck anymore. He referred to 3 separate operations, one in 1981, one in 1996, and the last in 2009, all centered around Whisper Wash. Each time, the same issues appeared: lost signals, scrambled data, missing logs. According to Avery, the park never issued an official restriction order. Instead, the area was quietly flagged on internal maps as unstable terrain. Permits simply stopped being approved. Whisper Wash faded from conversation. He leaned back in his chair when describing what he believed was happening. Some places in the canyon have layers of iron and quartz that mess with instruments. It's natural mostly, but Whisper Wash, it behaved like it had a mind of its own. You'd turn east, your compass spun west. Cameras froze mid-recording. It wasn't just geology. It felt selective. When asked about the missing footage from Emily's recovered data card, Avery hesitated. I can't explain that, he admitted, but I've seen it before. One of our guys shot survey footage back in '94. Same thing, clean visuals, then gaps, seconds missing, like someone cut the film, but no edits in the file. His tone grew softer, almost regretful. We stopped sending people there after that. The canyon has rules, and we broke one. Before ending the call, Avery left a final statement for the record. We stopped asking questions because the canyon stopped answering. The line lingered long after the tape stopped rolling, a quiet acknowledgement that some silences aren't meant to be filled. The discovery of Emily Carver's lost data card reignited more than public interest. It prompted a quiet re examination of every physical item collected from her case file. Most of it was routine: sediment samples, fragments of gear, fragments of paper degraded by time and heat. But one envelope, mislabeled and sealed since 2009, drew the most attention. It contained a small glass vial wrapped in foam, sample Mena 14. The label, still faintly legible beneath a streak of dried dust, read, Layer 7 Exposure, Whisper Wash. For years, investigators had assumed the 14th sample was never recovered, but somewhere during the early cataloging, the vial had been misplaced, logged incorrectly, and buried in storage. When the forensic lab at the University of Arizona received it for testing, the expectation was simple: confirm sediment type, record composition, and archive the result. Instead, the analysis produced a finding that deepened the mystery. The iron content of the sample was nearly triple the expected ratio for that region. More alarming, the isotopic structure didn't match the Grand Canyon's known geological layers at all. The mineral signature resembled iron oxide formations found hundreds of miles east, near volcanic fields outside Flagstaff. In other words, the rock Emily had labeled as belonging to Layer 7 could not have originated there. Further testing revealed faint traces of magnetite, microscopic but highly reactive. When exposed to a magnetic field, the sample vibrated, slightly, enough to register movement under laboratory sensors. Dr. Alana Reed, who led the analysis, described it in her report. Unusual metallic response, not dangerous, not synthetic, possibly meteorologic in origin, if natural, extremely rare. The team debated what it meant. Some believed Emily had misidentified the location, taken the sample from a different layer, or retrieved displaced material from a flood channel. Others suggested she might have followed an anomaly in her compass, mistaking magnetic interference for a geological pattern worth studying. That theory carried weight. If the area distorted readings, her careful instruments might have led her in circles, 2 miles east, toward the same off-map corridor that had misled others before her. But there was one detail none of the scientists could explain. When the lab logged the vial's electromagnetic properties, the sensors around it fluctuated, briefly cutting power to the scanner. It only happened once, and only with that sample. The report ended cautiously, its final line written in dry academic language but carrying something almost like unease. Magnetic origin uncertain. Recommend no further handling. The vial was resealed, archived, and placed back into evidence storage. No official conclusion followed. Emily's last discovery, whatever it was, remained unclassified. The canyon, as always, kept its silence. 6 months after the discovery of Emily Carver's data card, Liam Harker returned to the Grand Canyon. The headlines had faded, the story already shifting from breaking news to half-remembered mystery, but he wasn't there for closure or for footage. He came to leave something behind. The hike down Tanner Trail was quiet that morning. Wind moved low through the ravines, whispering against the stone like distant breath. The air was colder than before, thin and dry, carrying the same stillness that had haunted him since his first descent. He carried one small item in his pack, Emily's compass. It had been recovered beside her other belongings, the casing scratched but intact. Inside, the needle no longer held steady. It spun lazily, as if unsure which direction to trust. Liam reached the bend near Hants Creek just before noon. The spot looked almost unchanged, the same twisted tree roots, the same curve of river. Only the sun had shifted, striking the cliffs at a slightly sharper angle. He stood there for a long time before unpacking the compass. Then he crouched by the edge of the water and set it down on a flat stone. The glass caught the light for a moment before a cloud passed overhead, dimming it to gray. His voice came soft, barely above the sound of the current. The canyon doesn't take, it archives. He wasn't sure why he said it. Maybe because the evidence never really vanished. The tents, the notebooks, the echoes of people who had walked these same trails before him, each left a trace. The canyon didn't erase them, it folded them into its layers, keeping them like the rest of its geology, untouched, unanswered, preserved. He filmed a final shot, one long continuous frame from the river to the horizon. No narration, just silence and wind. Later, when the footage was edited, he added one sound beneath it, the faint crackle of Emily's last audio note, filtered and distant. Perfect light. Will continue tomorrow. The words bled into the hum of wind and running water, fading so gradually that they became part of the landscape. The closing scene showed the river cutting through the stone, slow and endless as the compass glinted one last time under the sun. Then darkness. No conclusion, no theory, no resolution, just the canyon, unchanged, unmoved, and still watching. Because in the end, it never truly lost her. It simply kept her story the way it keeps everything else, quietly beneath the surface, fade to black,